And good Sunday evening, everybody. Welcome back. We are back after a hiatus. Time flies as it always does. I am your host, Chris Doyle, and to my virtual left, we have Rick. Rick, say hello to the people.
How's everyone doing? Happy New Year. We're
Yes.
back.
Happy New Year. We are back. We took about 6 weeks off or 7 weeks off, whatever it was. It flew. It felt like we were just here yesterday.
It did.
But we're back. We're excited. We are full of energy. Shade of Icarus is already commenting in the chat, which is awesome. And Dice Station Zebra, hello, hello, hello. Yes.
Hey.
So we are excited to be back. A couple of quick announcements to just update some folks on some things. Crypt of the Devil Lich Kickstarter, long awaited, heavily delayed. Cursed, we call this the Cursed Project, actually, for many reasons. Actually, some people call it the Curse of the Devil Lich. But it is shipping literally as we speak, although I don't think anybody's at the warehouse right now shipping. But 95% of them have shipped, apparently. So that is moving along. We are addressing all the little snafus that we're having. Over 3,000 parcels are going out for that project. So there have been a couple of snafus. I believe we are aware of all of them and we are addressing them. The next announcement is we have another episode of What's Coming Down the 5E Pike. That is coming Friday, January 20th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And I will be doing a Crypt of the Devil Lich unboxing slash flipping through the book and all the things as soon as mine arrives. I'll be honest with you, mine has not even arrived yet. So take that, backers, for all of you out there wondering where yours is. It's like I haven't even got mine yet. Yeah, so we're looking forward to that. I also have a special guest. So that'll be a great episode. So folks want to make sure they grab us. And of course, as always, you can grab us on YouTube afterwards if you can't make it on Friday the 20th at 6 p.m. Rick, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm actively gaming into the new year.
Nice.
I just played in a game, which is always a rare treat for me. I'm usually the DM, as you know. So
Yes, yes.
we're going through the original Adventures reincarnated version of the Lost City, and we're approaching the climactic battle. So
Ooh,
we're in the final throws, so it's interesting, and like we say, it's always cool when you're a DM to see how other DMs do it. I find, I always learn
yeah.
something, so
Wow, so we can
we've had
actually
some
talk
fun.
about P4 then at some point on the
Yeah,
show.
yeah,
Yeah, well, we're gonna have to do that. You gotta let us know when you're done so we can put that on the schedule because we
definitely.
have avoided, folks, we have avoided P4 specifically for that reason
Yeah,
because 2 years ago Rick was like, "Hey, I'm gonna be playing this one," and I was like, I don't want to read it. So,
that
uh,
was the one classic module, for whatever reason, I didn't, that I knew a lot of people liked, and I purposely did not touch because I knew a DM who always wanted to run it, and I waited, and patience sometimes is rewarded. So yeah.
sometimes that's great, excellent. So cool. Yes, I've been doing some gaming, some board gaming, but I did re-kick back off the super secret playtest that I've been working on. Had an amazing session yesterday.
Nice.
Left everybody with a great cliffhanger. And we have a very, very special session coming up in 2 weeks with a very special guest that will
Mm.
be joining us to tie up one of the characters' loose end story arcs. So having an absolute blast with that. I got a great group, an old, a seasoned veteran group that put me through the tests every single time. It's 5 against 1, and it's brutal. So I see that Sky 2 is waiting on his Crypto the Devil Lich, and Shade of Icarus, his is coming tomorrow. His or hers is coming tomorrow. So woo!
Wow.
So exciting time. So, but tonight we are here not to talk about the Devil Lich anymore. We are here to talk about another classic. That's what
Yeah.
we do on this show. We talk about classics, but it almost doesn't get any more classic. Honestly, it
No,
seems like we always say this. It almost
I
doesn't
know,
get any more
right?
classic. Adventure module G1 Steading of the Hill Giant Chief by Gary Gygax.
Yes.
So yeah, this like I said, it doesn't get any more old school than this. Rick, why don't you
Yeah.
out of the gate here with some opening thoughts on this classic module?
Sure. And classic really fits this one because this was technically, I mean, depending on how you count it, it was technically the first official TSR adventure module released. There were one or two other things that had been released or tournament modules that had been printed and distributed in some way, but this was the first standalone that was actually issued. It was the tournament module for Origins 1978, and then later in 1978, they published it. And I'm going to show off, if it shows on camera, my pristine copy.
Oh,
So yeah, this is even in the plastic, the whole bit.
yeah.
So anyway, yeah. Well, look at
My,
that. There we go.
yeah.
Both
Yeah.
versions. See, we got it
Yeah.
covered, folks. We cover all the
My,
angles here.
my copy of G1 in the mono is not in such good condition.
Well, this
As
is
yours.
my second. I have another
Okay.
that's in tatters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now that I've shown this one off, I'll probably accidentally drop it in a meat grinder or something. But yeah, so let's talk about how short this sucker is, because
Yeah.
that's, I think any DM who looks at this thing, or any of the initial giant modules really, looks and says, whoa, because we're talking what, 7 or 8 pages, but yet
7.
58 encounters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what do you think about that? I mean, just the sheer brevity of it.
Yeah, so the phrase that comes to mind there is economy of words, I would
Hmm.
say, and Gygax was really good at that, where he could
Yeah.
get a lot of information across in a very short amount of words.
Hmm.
But yeah, I was actually pretty stunned to actually count up and find out 58 encounters over 2 levels. The 7 pages, I always thought it was 8 pages. It's 7 pages, and there's a couple of paragraphs of like overall series set up, at
Yeah.
least in my the green version of it, that which is slightly different, I think, than the original monocolor monochrome cover. But yeah, so just unbelievable that
Hmm.
so much information. And I think it's part of a good thing about this
Hmm.
adventure, but it also is not a good thing. And I
Yeah.
think we're going to
Yeah.
talk about a couple of those things too.
Yeah.
On there were definitely some areas where maybe a few more paragraphs would have really
Yeah.
helped out,
Yeah.
but still a classic. So I'll out of the gate, I'll throw this one to you, and then I'll give you my thoughts. But
Hmm.
in comparison to G1, G2, G3, I think I know the answer to this, but where does this one rank in the pantheon of the 3G adventures for you, as far as
Um,
favorite, not favorite, indifferent?
Out of the three, I
Yeah.
would put this one as my least entry.
Okay.
However, that being said, and again, I'm going to sound like I feel like I come and say this every single show, but I don't feel like this module exactly though gets the acclaim it deserves, because it is a good standalone. For that small amount of pages, there's an amazing amount of adventuring that can be had here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, again,
Certainly.
there's certainly arguments, I guess, as to how much the DM's got to fill in, whether that's a good thing, a bad thing, how much
Yeah.
theory of the mind. There's obviously not a lot of DM notes or defensive notes for the Giants and things that kind of we even got later, like with G3, that don't show up in this one. So yeah, I think it depends, how wild and woolly you want to play it as a DM, but just given the huge amount of areas, a well-realized layer, 2 good maps, full of rooms, lot going on in here. I think for you're getting your 7 pages worth. Let's put it that way. I mean,
Oh yeah.
considering this thing probably sold originally what, for like $7 or $8 or something. I mean, it's amazing to me how this has stood up.
Yeah. So this one, I would agree. This one is probably my least favorite as well. And I think it's my least favorite just simply because the setting, it's kind of
Yep.
it's a little bland. I mean,
Mhm.
especially if you compare it to the other two settings, and kind of the interesting intricacies of the layers and everything.
Mhm.
It's basically a wooden stockade fort and in a dungeon level, and it's kind of set in a hilly slash mountainous region. So there, it's just not that interesting in my opinion, and that's
Yeah.
probably why it never really stood out to me.
Mhm.
And I even think many of the encounters, because of the shortness, I think, and I think it suffered for that a little bit. And I think that's a good point. I think this is definitely one of those adventures where, if you have a good game master and that game master can kind of elevate it and take it to the next level,
Mhm.
I think that's where people probably either have really fond memories of this one, or maybe not so fond memories of
Yeah.
this one.
Yeah.
I would say so. I actually never ran through this one as a player.
Hmm.
I ran through no, that's not true. That's not true. So I ran through G2 as a player first, like a part of it, like one session. And then I actually revisited all of the G modules and including G1 too.
Hmm.
This was a really interesting, and I remember this because this is the way we did it back in the day. I'm pretty sure it was 1985. I'm pretty sure it was the summer of 85 when I actually ran through these. We had one DM, one player. I was the
Wow.
player. Okay.
Wow.
I had 10 player characters I ran. And I used to put them in a pile. And they were we used to put them in pile based on initiative order. And back then you used to roll one die for initiative. So it was more
Hmm.
like you got to decide which characters acted first and second and third and all that. So each combat I would decide who I wanted to go first, and I put them in a pile, and it was like face up, and it's like I'd roll the attacks and then flip the sheet over and then go to the next one and go to the next one, do all 10. And then my buddy, who was the game master, would then run. And I remember this distinctly. It was the summer. We ran through all three of the adventures
Hmm.
in about 2 weeks because he only had 2 weeks. He had summer camps
Wow.
and things. So for the entire summer vacation, I had 2 weeks with him. And so it was every single day. I showed up at his place at like 9 in the morning and we played D&D, and then his mom would make us go outside and play badminton for a while or croquet just to get around and move around because she
Yeah,
didn't want us in the
just to see
basement
that great
just
yellow thing
gaming.
called the sun. So
Yes.
what percentage of characters were still there at the end of the three? That's what I have to ask.
Well, a lot of them were high level characters,
Okay.
much higher than they should have been. Some of them were lower level characters, but
Hmm.
no, I do believe we did lose a couple along the way. But for the most part, these characters were, I mean, I think I had a 15th level fighter, and they're, I'd up with plus
Hmm.
five, magic trident and stuff. And yeah, it's like, I'd wave the trident from S2. That was like the backup weapon. That wasn't
Hmm.
even like the main weapon. It was like, yeah. So
Oh,
we were,
wow.
yeah, this is Monty Hall days.
Yeah.
But it was fun. But I tell you, the fire giants almost ruined us. I mean, the fire
Hmm.
giants were just, yeah, that was just not cool. But my game master, he did, like, when we did the forays, we would go in and then retreat. Then he would set up elaborate ambushes and stuff,
Hmm.
and there was
Oh,
like, and
nice.
that's
Okay.
what elevated it to the next level. I mean, there was one combat in the fire giant lair that lasted literally probably 4 hours, and we were
Wow.
almost all dead by the end, and it was crazy. So, but then the rest of the level, there wasn't much
Good
left, but
memories. I
it
never
was.
went through it as a player, but I certainly ran it, all three as a DM.
Yep,
And I guess maybe it's the time period thing, but I remember exactly the same in the 80s in the summer
yep,
playing total Monty Hall games. I
yep.
I actually had a character who had Black Razor, so
There you go. There you go.
which and it totally fits you to have Wave,
Oh yeah.
I
Oh
want to
yeah.
say. And because you probably went right for the crab first. And yeah, it's just I think that's the way it was then, is we were all lugging around some kind of at least one powerful artifact
Yep,
thing,
yep.
that,
Certainly. Yeah,
that
yeah.
some DM gave us who probably shouldn't have, kind of thing.
Exactly.
But that's the way you rolled in those days.
It was.
But yeah, it was just good. But I did have good experiences running this and running all the Giants modules actually, as shown in our show when we went through our top adventure series. I think this was my second to,
Yes.
my penultimate series that I listed, and for good reason, because I am truly very fond of this series of three modules.
Yeah, so very interesting in that this adventure was designed for 9 characters. If I recall, it used to be 7 to 10 characters or 6 to 10 characters, ninth level each. So yeah, that's why we had 10. I mean, and again, I had I
Mhm.
had a few seventh level characters, I believe, but then I said we had some also like 15th level characters as well. So it was like kind of totally busted. But then, and there was that line in the beginning, in the intro, there was a line about specifically Gygax. It kind of acknowledged that if you do the adventure in 4As, which you probably needed to do because of all
Mhm.
the giants, if you left and pulled out and retreated, he said, oh, it's like the giants will set up ambushes and traps
Yeah.
and strategies and tactics and that, but didn't tell you what any of those were.
Yeah.
Just said they'll do that. The Giants will do that, and it was like, again. So I guess if you had a good, I'm guessing my buddy the night before was like looking over maps and planning out all this stuff and everything
Mhm.
because he wasn't doing it on the fly at our game table. So But yeah, so that was something where, probably could have used a couple of paragraphs of,
Yeah.
here's some suggestions on what to do. They'll pull back, or they'll set up a
Yeah.
blockade in this room or something like that. And again, back then we were certainly not the game masters we were today. So we needed more prompting, in my
Yeah.
opinion, than we
No, I
got way
agree.
back then.
Reading and rereading through this recently, the lack of and again, even compared to fairly, temporal products that came out around the same time, the lack of DM advice for certain things, was glaring. There were some notes in there. I mean, I noticed they covered the possibility and kind of almost took it off the table of the character simply burning down the fort, which I guess the fort
Hmm.
being a wood would make sense. And there are some notes about if creatures are running from the first level, where they would go in the dungeon level, which I thought was
Yep.
good. But it's almost like that kind of thing. I wish they had, like another
Yep.
page of that or a half a page of that would have been great.
Agreed.
Telling you like, well, they set up ballistae here and they do this and they do that. That's the kind of stuff, you could dig your teeth into. Would have been wonderful.
Yeah.
You wonder what this module would have been like. It had it been 14 pages, instead
Yeah.
of 7 or 8.
A whole 14.
Yeah, I'm giving them, a 6 because
Yes.
I'm so generous. But yeah, just a few extra pages of notes and detail. Because there's a few entries that are definitely so truncated that they're almost like the typical Gygaxian sort of rather dry laundry list of furniture and treasure and the stuff. And
Yes. The
but
important
again,
stuff.
I think with the right DM, this can sing.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I thought it was interesting that there were some notes in the beginning that if any of the giants, especially some of the more powerful giants, if they escape or don't get defeated, that they would flee and go basically to like the next giant lair. They
mhm,
would make their way to the next giant lair, and then you could encounter them again. I thought that was kind of cool.
mhm.
I don't recall back then, something similar to that, like in a series of modules where it's basically, oh, if the hill giant chief gets away, he can pop up again. Like, I know it sounds strange, but to us kids back then,
Mhm.
keep in mind we're in like middle school, something like that. That was an innovative idea. Like,
Yeah.
wow, it's like the hill giant could like go and be at the frost giant lair, and I'm
Mhm.
like, huh. I'm like, I guess I never thought of that. And it's like,
Yeah.
so it's like, and then they'll have to fight him again. So it's like stuff like that was, I think, kind of
Mhm.
interesting for discovering it as a young game master and really inexperienced, a green game master basically. So okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Mhm.
And sometimes these old classic modules, there always is an elephant in the room. This one, not so much an elephant. The Great Hall, Area 11,
Yeah.
on the first level. So before I comment, so for those of you not familiar with this encounter, this is a single encounter area. Here is now this room is huge. It's like
Yeah.
160 by 120 feet, plus there's
Yeah.
an
We should put
antechamber.
up the fortress map if we can. Yeah, there we
Yeah,
go. Great.
the first level, yeah. There's pillars, there's a fire pit, there's tables. So basically, and it sort of works. Many of the giants on the first level are actually in this room all in one
Mhm.
spot. That helps you in exploring the rest of the upper level.
Yeah.
But if you enter this room,
Yeah.
you're in trouble. You have the hill giant chief who fights as a frost giant, his wife, a sub chief, a cloud giant. I'm reading the notes because I would
Yep.
never remember all this. A cloud giant emissary, three stone giant emissaries, 22. Let me just say that one more time.
Yeah.
22 hill giants, eight ogres, and if that's not enough, there just happens to be a cave bear underneath the table too. So it's like that is insane
Yeah.
amount of adversaries in one chamber. That's there's no game balance going on there, folks.
Yeah.
That is, you blunder into that room, and you don't use stealth, or you
Yeah.
don't throw a 20 hit die fireball in there or something and slam the
I was
door.
just gonna say,
Yeah,
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 a
like,
few. If you knew they were there and a few well-placed fireballs from that hallway, maybe you could pull it off. But
yeah,
any poor party who walks into that meat grinder unprepared,
yeah.
woe
It's
is
not
them.
good. Yeah, but
Yeah.
that is the way things went back
Hmm.
in the 70s and 80s. There were, and again, it was interesting, and I guess when I was young and playing this, I didn't realize this, but it made sense. That made it easier to basically sneak around the rest of the lair.
Hmm.
But it did put a lot of adversaries in one location, which
Yeah.
is probably not a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
It's
don't know what your
interesting.
thoughts are on that
Yeah,
encounter.
no, I agree. I mean, it obviously jumps out at any DM, I think, reading it, that you just look at that room. Like you said, 20, just 22 Jill. Forget all the other stuff. Forget
Yeah.
the cave bear. The cave bear is just the cherry on the
Yeah.
mayhem Sunday that you've just
No,
served up.
no, the cave bear is
Uh,
just when the rogue jumps underneath the table to get away from
right.
the
Yeah.
giants. It's like, oh,
The
and by
cave
the
bear's
way,
under
there's a
the
cave bear
cave
there.
bear's like laying under the table, the
Yep.
chief's table or something. Um, I mean, what is interesting is if you look at the map, you don't now, of course, how the players would exactly know this, I don't know, but you don't have to go through the Great Hall to get
Mhm,
anywhere. It's it's
mhm.
it's set up like a great donut,
Yeah.
almost, where it's a sort of like a circular, layer around the Great Hall. So it is interesting that, and like you said, it's good and it's bad because it lets the players do a lot of reconnaissance, a lot of exploration, and even potentially, get to the lower levels without having to run into this big group. I mean, of course, on the flip side, the whole purpose of the characters being here is supposed to be to deal a check to the giants, which in
Yep.
my mind means kick their butts.
Yep.
So I don't know how you can do that if you're not really confronting them in force. But for characters who do want to get the lay of the land and reconnaissance, through the place, and there's certainly means to do it. And there are some notes to the effect of stealth I noticed in here. There are, they're like in the ogre lair room, there's a note that like any noise from this room will be ignored, I guess, because the inhabitants are used to the ogres roughhousing in this room, or arguing or whatever ogres do in their spare time. So there are a lot of notes to that effect, that you could definitely, I think what's cool is you could play this off in that way, you could, that's like a sort of stealth mission almost way, because they go out of their way to tell you that this great hall is very loud, so potentially I think any characters maybe opening up the entrance to that long hall, that long smoky hall that goes down, could hear this ruckus, maybe quick shut the door or do something, and then think, oh my goodness, how are we going to handle this? And that I think is cool. That lays out some interesting ideas. But I think you need a skilled DM to pull this off. I would not throw this G
Certainly.
series at a new DM.
Yeah. Because then what do you do when the feast ends? Or if the
Hmm.
PCs come back 6 hours later or a day later,
Yeah.
you can't assume that they're all in the Great Hall still having that.
Yeah.
That'd be one heck of a feast. So yeah, I think that's the part where it gets a little tricky, where you don't really have a lot of descriptive notes on what happens when the party's over. Where do they go? I mean, there were some notes on where some of them
Yep.
went, the Cloud Giant and
Yeah.
the Stone Giants, and obviously the chief and the wife and the sub chief had their layers and everything, but the other 22, it's like, huh, where do those all go? I mean,
Hmm.
they didn't really break that down either. So it was an interesting dynamic. I mean, it worked if you did one foray into the
Hmm.
into the lair, but I think it sort of broke down after that. But again, a good competent game master, and let's be honest, I mean, Mr. Gygax is the one who wrote this, so I'm
Hmm.
sure he knew how to run it quite well. Because I'm sure that wasn't an issue at
Right.
all to him, but that didn't help middle school aged Chris in central New Jersey, trying to figure out how the heck to do this and deal with 22 hill giants at one time. So, but it's an interesting glimpse on the way adventures were certainly
Hmm.
put together back in the day.
To be sure. To be sure.
Yeah. So we have a top five, and even though there are 58 encounters in here, we're also doing, in addition to encounters, it could be any part of the adventure. So we'll say that this top five is going to be encounters or facets. We always seem to have some overlap on these crossovers, and I'm sure we're going to have crossovers on this
Oh
one
yeah.
again, because we always seem to. So um
I suspect I've got a mix of facets, and before we launch into what did you
okay.
think of the art of this one before we go into?
The art was not bad. It was interesting, the art that they did. There's one piece of like a giant hanging up bags
Yep.
and sacks, which is kind of interesting, instead of a piece of like a hill giant fighting PCs. There's another one where there's the kitchen,
Yeah,
where you've got the giantess kind of cooking and threatening the orcs, I think it is, or the ogres.
yeah.
Um, and that's an interesting piece too.
David
There's
A.
not a lot of,
Trampier.
yeah, there's, yep, exactly. Not a lot of art and interesting choices that they took on it.
Yeah.
The art's okay. And again, in
Hmm.
7 pages, I guess it's pretty amazing that we got, was it 5 pieces of art in those
Yeah.
7 pages? I
Yeah.
thought that was actually pretty impressive. So
Yeah. I
what'd you think?
agree. I wish the art had featured something a little different. I don't mind the art. It's very evocative, I think, what's there. And there's a Sutherland piece and there's a
Mm-hmm.
Trampier piece. So that
Mm-hmm.
makes me happy. I'm a big David A. Trampier fan, but I just love that woodcutty look to his art. So that even that early piece is, I like it. But yeah, I wish we had what was the name of the chief? Nostra? I
Yes.
believe that the name of the chief is actually an anagram for
Oh,
Arneson. That's
oh
the funny
wow.
thing. And because Gygax was very playful with that kind of stuff. And
Okay.
he doesn't really have a lot of nice things to say about the chief's personality and such too. And I thought it was interesting that he used, yeah, it's basically an anagram of Arneson.
Mm.
But I wish, in any case, I wish there had been a picture of him, would have been really cool. Um,
All right.
so yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, we can launch in, I think,
Okay.
right?
Well, we do have an interesting question, I think, in the chat here. Emarina wanting to know, what is our favorite adventure for a family with
Mm.
teens that want to get into things? And Shade of Icarus jumped in real quick with the Lost City. I think the Lost City would be an amazing one to start with. That's
Hmm.
B4. I also
Yeah,
think B1 or B2 are
sure.
probably really good ones that are pretty
Yeah,
straightforward. In my experience, teens and younger teens kind of want to kick the door down and just kind of kick monster butt.
yeah.
I'm actually part of a 4-H club,
Hmm.
and it's mostly actually even younger than teens. Actually, sometimes fourth, fifth, sixth graders. And they literally want to get to the action and chuck
Yeah,
the dice. So they're almost in tears if they don't. So
yeah.
I see the recommendation for Curse of Strahd in there too. That's good. That's a little heavier, I think.
I think, yeah, that might be a
Yeah.
little heavy. And normally I would say Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh, but I think
Oh,
that's
yeah.
better for maybe the slightly younger set than
Yeah.
because like you said, teens, I think, I hate to say it, but they're coming from that video game vibe a lot of times where they want
Yes.
to just get in there
That
and
get to the
make it
action.
happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you definitely have to do that almost novel trope of and I mean novel as in written novel of like putting chapter 2 before chapter 1 and getting the action in there for you got
Yeah.
to give them that opening fight, I think, is really
Yeah.
important.
That's true. Yeah, Salt Marsh should be a little bit more. Again, Salt
Uh,
Marsh is Scooby-Doo-ish. We've talked about that before. I think that's
yeah.
a decent one to go to. But I think those are definitely good suggestions. So, all right, so now we'll get
All
down to
right.
business with the top five here. So, do you have any honorable mentions, sir?
All right. Well, we kind of discussed it already. My honorable mention was the Great Hall
Okay.
because I do think you know it's an absolutely insane fight if you can pull it off as a DM or as a player. I like the stealth, around it. I like all the different notes in the Wandering Monster table about who's coming and going, and
Mm,
his wife's going to get her cave bear or whatever, all this kind of stuff, which I think is really it makes it feel like more like a living, breathing place to me.
hmm
And knock it or not, and I could definitely see people having trouble with it as we've discussed, but I think it's a really interesting choice to have all the giants there reveling right in the middle when normally like people like me would just assume the chief would be sitting in his bedroom just waiting for somebody to come find him. Instead, no, they're going to put him right in there with 22 other giants. So just for such a bold design choice, that gets my honorable mention.
Okay. My honorable mention is Area 3 on the lower level, the cell block. So
Mm,
cell block had an interesting variety of different folks that were captured.
yep.
There was 5 different cells. There were skeletons, which was unique. Oh, but watch out, they each had 8 hit points, so look out. For ninth level characters. There were a couple of orc rebels, which was
Mhm.
interesting because the orcs were something you could use as a resource down in the lower level. There was an insane merchant, there was an engineer, and
Mhm.
there was quite the reason why I kind of put this as my honorable mention was there was an elf fighter magic user there, and I remember we freed the fighter magic user and added him to the party. And I remember we had to come up with a name for him, and we were not good at names back then. Come on, keep in mind, middle school, teenagers
Yep.
here. So we busted out a copy of Lord of the Rings and went right back to the appendix, and we're like, huh, Finrod. Finrod sounds like a cool elven name. So we
There
had
you go.
Finrod in our party for the next probably like 2 or 3 years
That's
after
funny.
that. So
I always
um
played Magic User Fighters too.
yes.
That
Oh
was
yeah,
my shtick. I
that was
always
the
would have
classic.
an elven or a half elven Magic User Fighter.
Yeah.
Always, like, I don't know why, but that
That
was my thing.
classic, absolute classic. All right. Do you want to go first with your five, or would you like me to start?
I don't know who went. I'll go first. That's fine.
Okay, go for it.
All right, and you just touched on this one actually. My number five choice, and in this you could consider a faucet, is the Orc Rebellion. I think this adds a really interesting dynamic to the module. Obviously, it gives a way for players to do other things in combat or get information or even quasi guides out of these orcs, because there's several places where they can run into orcs that have been obviously not treated well. Even in the orcs quarters, I think there's like one or two orcs that are recovering in there from beatings or what have you, that are happy to tell people, hey, downstairs there's friendly orcs. So I like that. I like the fact that the characters could potentially come in here, sneak around, speak to the serving staff, and kind of make things happen in that way. So that's my number five, is just the facet of that whole orc rebellion. And then also even the dynamic with the orcs and the trogs having a sort of loose alliance in the lower level. That's interesting too. And then you wonder how that will impact the characters. If the characters come to some sort of agreement with the orcs, or at least a loose parley with the orcs, does that extend to the trogs or not? It just sets up a lot of interesting role play abilities that maybe aren't present in this module otherwise. So that's my number five. It's the whole
Awesome.
thing of the Orc Rebellion.
The Orc Rebellion. Awesome. Okay. My number five is Area 14 on the upper level. This is where the emissaries hang out, the Cloud
Mm-hmm.
Giant and the Stone Giants. Now, this reminded me of U1 when you're storming the Sea Ghost and you come across lizard folk,
Mm-hmm.
and you're kind of like, wait, what are these lizard folk doing here? Same thing here. It's, even though they might not be encountered here and they're probably in the Great Hall,
Mm-hmm.
but there's three stone giants and a cloud giant, and it really kind of it's that tie-in. Which is what's interesting about this is the fact that there isn't a cloud giant adventure and there isn't a stone
Mm-hmm.
giant adventure. So
Yeah.
did the PCs actually screw something up here? Did they actually stop a truce or something between them, or an alliance or whatever, or what happened? Like, why was there no stone giant
Mm-hmm.
lair, or there a cloud giant lair? And somebody should do something about that, throwing that out there. But anyway, I really kind of like this encounter for that reason. I also like the
Mm-hmm.
fact that there was a giant slaying sword hidden, it had an illusion on it, made it look like a
Yeah.
torch. But if you
Yeah.
if you investigated this torch and figured out the illusion, you got a very useful magic
Yeah.
item.
Yeah.
I kind of like the idea that a giant slaying sword was kind of put in one of the earlier encounters that you could
Mm-hmm.
definitely put to really good use for the next three adventures.
Absolutely.
It's I've done this time and time again too,
Mm-hmm.
so I've taken that inspiration from that. So
Yeah.
so I really kind of like this encounter. That is my number
Mm-hmm.
five, the emissary chamber.
Nice. And that, that raises another whole topic of just, you have this backstory, obviously, about this whole alliance of giants and the Drow and everything going on, but there really aren't a lot of hints or information in
No,
this module.
no,
Honestly, if the players aren't really looking around under every little bit of rubbish and checking around and finding things, they could absolutely just stop at this module and not
yeah,
understand that there's another whole thing going on, or
yeah,
and now I do think those emissaries are part of that, but like, yeah, why it would have been a lot more conspicuous if it had been a frost giant in there or something.
yep,
So
yeah.
it almost makes you wonder why they picked that choice. But it made me think about how the overall plot I felt was very lightly represented in this module.
You
Almost
almost wonder if
underrepresented.
you almost wonder if there was supposed to be a
Yeah.
cloud giant and
Yeah.
a stone giant
Hmm.
adventure, so which is intriguing. What we didn't
Yeah.
get. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Possibility. Yeah.
yeah.
Possible, to be sure. All right. So we back on me.
Hmm.
All right. Area, and it's funny, looking at for a giant module, I think almost all my areas are not giant
Or
related.
not giant
But
encounters? Oh, that's interesting.
but my number 4 is Area 23, the Cavern of the Carrion Crawlers.
Okay.
And if we could throw up the dungeon map again, I thought this was a cool area. I like the idea that you can poke around and find the treasure, if you're
Yes.
but what I really like even more is that you have this area. And if I have been reading the module right all these years, there's basically two kind of ways, two roundabout ways to get into this cavern. You can either follow the stream in from, I think it's the Trog Cavern, or there's sort of like a little passage that comes in from the cistern that you can kind of crawl through, that they say comes up in the stream that wends its way to this cavern. But otherwise, the cavern's not directly accessible. And I think that is really cool, because here you have an interesting area that, potentially the characters can find some treasure or magic items or loot, but it's not directly accessible. It's certainly not part of the regular adventure. It's sort of like a hidden little, almost Easter eggy sort of cavern,
Yeah.
which only the clever players or lucky players can find. Which I love Easter eggs, so yeah, that was an easy pick for me.
Cool.
Area 23, Cavern of the Carrion Crawlers. That's what I call
Awesome.
them.
Awesome. That's cool. And I see Thick Skull Adventures said that way back in the day, a gamer actually wrote additional G series adventures, Sanctum of the Stone Giant Lord, Curse of the Cloud Giant Queen. So yeah, everybody's talking that up in the chat, which is
I
good.
think I
So
remember those actually.
really,
I
I do
Yeah,
not. I do
I
not.
remember seeing them or seeing those
Okay.
names online. I couldn't tell you a thing about them, but I
Guessing,
absolutely remember somebody doing that. I couldn't have. I'm glad you. Thank you, Thick Skull, for naming the person though,
yeah.
because I couldn't have told you who it was.
Guessing there's Google searches going on right now as we
Right there
speak.
we
So
go. Yeah.
all right, my number four is not an encounter. This is the Giant's Bag contents, the little random table in the beginning
Hmm.
of the intro. I love this. This
Hmm.
sings back to the economy of words
Yep.
of getting by having a lot of different interesting stuff
Hmm.
in a table, essentially,
Yep.
basically. And it's great. I mean, it's just you roll percentile dice. Most of the things are useless in there. There's boulders, there's moldy cheese, there's haunches of meat, but there's a little bit of treasure. I have used this directly as inspiration. The most recent
Hmm.
time I used this was in this FEF 19 Denizens of the Reed Maze. I basically came up with a couple little tables for trinkets that
Hmm.
the frog folk could be carrying, and little interesting things that they're carrying in their pouches and that. So this is something that's inspired me, and I love it. Just it was an interesting little touch. I think
Hmm.
that certainly wasn't needed, but did bring a little bit extra to the table and set some of the encounters apart. Again, the game master kind of had to do it on his own, but he was essentially given the tool and given I love that, just the seeds of here's what you could do, and I'm sure those tables,
Hmm.
like for me, inspired people to make the tables bigger and add even more things on there and everything. So love that little thing. So my number four was the contents of the Giants bags. And they
Nice.
would, even in the adventure and in some of the encounters, they would say there's two giant bags in this
Yep.
room, and it's like roll away on it
Yeah.
and everything. So kind of cool. So okay, so that's my number four, the Giants bags contents.
Very nice. I heartily agree, because my number 3 pick is the
No way.
Giants bag
Oh,
table.
there you go. Wow. All right.
Ding. There's our first crossover to the year. Ding-a-ling.
Yep.
Um,
Didn't take long.
for the same reasons you mentioned, I love it because it gets the imagination going. There's a few items in there that maybe as a DM like caltrops I wouldn't have thought of immediately that are interesting. And there's some funny ones, that are like just giving the adventures like a big hunk of moldy cheese or whatever.
Yes.
Um, and I think especially in the early edition days, or at least for me as a DM, maybe this is just my personal experience. For me as a DM, rolling on random tables was fun. That was part of
Yes.
my fun, whether it was wandering monsters or it was things like this. I loved, or magical effects, things like that. I loved rolling on random tables and seeing, because as a DM, you're not surprised by a whole lot because you know the plot, you know the adventure, you know the encounters. So it gives you a chance as the DM to be surprised and or have to think on your feet, which is fun
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
me.
Definitely.
So Yeah, I for all those reasons, I adored this table. To me, like I would be happy to see a table like this in almost any adventure, you know.
Yeah,
So yeah, absolutely. And like you said, inspirational even today for things I write to look at that table and think,
yeah,
hey, I
yeah,
could do something. And again, something like what was done in that carrion crawler room, which is similar, where they give you, you know, if you search this room through the
yep,
rubble, you might find this
yep,
treasure.
exactly.
I've used that exact, you know, deceit in a few things I've written. I've
Yeah,
taken that kind of approach and had a room where players could poke around and possibly just find lost coins or, you know, something rolling around. Because again, I love that random rolling
yeah,
on, you know,
and
contents type of table.
really refreshing that that kind of made it over to the design philosophy of 5e, because you didn't see a whole lot of that in
Yeah.
3e, certainly didn't see much of it in 4e,
No,
but really
no.
it's a part of 5e's
Hmm.
design philosophy, which is really really refreshing. And you're
Yeah.
right, it is interesting. It's almost like the game within the game, so
Yeah.
more random tables.
That's
So
a good way to put it. Yeah, it's the
yeah.
mini game for the DM or the, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. My number three is area 19 on the upper level.
Mm.
This is the handsome giant trying
Oh
to
yeah.
impress the six lassies.
Hmm.
And again, is it silly? A little bit. The fact that there could be a handsome hill giant, first of all, it's a little bit silly. The fact that he's trying to impress six lassies, is kind of silly at the same time too.
Hmm.
And the fact that, Gygax goes so far as to saying it's like, oh, and it's like he will attack with bravado and will try to
Hmm.
show off, and his morale, he's got less of a chance to actually like call for help because he's
Yeah.
trying to be like Mr. Macho. I mean, I just keep thinking of the one character from Beauty and the Beast, and I mean, it's like it's just silly. But then at the same time, so apparently he is the Hound Master or the
Yeah.
Wolf Master, I guess, and there's a whip, I guess, in the room that's hanging
Hmm.
on a peg. And if you grab that whip and show it to the wolves, you will
Hmm.
cower the wolves in a different encounter.
Yeah.
And the wolves will not like make a huge racket and like basically,
Hmm.
reveal that the PCs are there. So that little extra thing, the whip is, I think, what kind of
Yeah.
puts it over the edge for
Yep.
me, where it's kind of like, oh, here's actually, they're probably not even going to think to take the whip.
Hmm.
But if they do for some reason take the whip and they show it to the wolves, you all of a sudden you have an advantage. And I love that. I love where there can be seemingly inconsequential items laying around a dungeon,
Hmm.
for lack of a better word for it, that could have a real impact on later
Yes.
encounters.
Yeah.
And it thematically makes sense, and it,
Hmm.
it logically makes sense, and
Yeah.
it's really a boon to the PCs if
Yeah.
they do it. So I actually really like that. Would have
Hmm.
loved to actually see some more of that actually,
Hmm.
in the adventure. But so that's my number three, area number 19 on the upper level.
No, I agree. I think that, and Gygax was good at that. That's a good example of an item
Yeah.
that has or not monetary, but has, you know, worth to the characters. Because he did something similar in D1, if you remember. He had a crook that if you showed the hieroscopics the
Yep.
crook, they would, like, you know, accept you as their master or something along those lines.
Yeah.
You know, I remember that one. I think a Trog or somebody had this crook. So it's a cool, like you said, it takes that little one, and that almost made it on my list. That guy was actually
Okay.
kind of on. He danced
Yeah.
on and off my list several times.
Mhm.
And like you said, the fact that they made him sort of the Hound Master or whatever puts it over the top. And it,
Yeah.
it, it also just makes it a different encounter. Instead of
Yeah.
just another
Yeah.
giants attacking the same way,
Yep.
now you have this guy who is trying to show off, is trying to be fearless. Maybe he's taking risks he shouldn't be, or being injured and not calling for help when he should be. And it gives the DM to change a chance to switch it up a little bit. So
Yeah.
totally good. Yeah, I agree. A nice little standout encounter. All right, so where are we? I'm on number
Number two.
two. I picked the treasure complex, which is sort
Okay.
of areas 30 to 33, I guess. It's really like four areas. It's because it's hard to separate them out. This is the area where you have, you know, a secret passage kind of comes down, and then, you know, there's a central room, and then there's two treasure rooms, and then there's a room full of insane manticores, and they go to really good detail describing how the manticores are handled, you know, as far as, you know, one set of bars that trap the manticores are spaced wide apart. Another set are purposely set tight so the manticores can't shoot people through the bars, which I think was really good thinking on the writer's part.
Mhm.
It talks about how the Manticores are insane and they're fed by garbage that comes down a kitchen chute. So the Manticores must be just completely thrilled at their captivity. Um, so you can imagine them taking out their vengeance on any poor characters that come their way. And there's a room where you can, raise and lower the different portcullises and such. So I just think it's not beyond the imagination that Hill Giants could come up with this sort of arrangement, but it's cool. And it's very
Mhm.
different than the treasure kind of hoards seen in the other giant layers. So I like it. I like this arrangement of rooms and the prison and the manticores. And just the manticores are a cool monster anyway. So I just like it's got all the numbers for me. So that's my number two, is that whole little, and again, giant, sort of giant free, though there is a very ghastly giant, I think not far away, that has some personality. But yeah, although it's giant free, I thought it was a nice little encounter in this adventure.
Cool. Excellent. All right. My number two is another crossover.
Uh-oh.
The orcs in the dungeon, the rebel
Ah, there we
orcs.
go.
Yeah. So 78 orc rebels. So this was again, you didn't touch on this, so I mean, there's not too much for me to add to it, but one of the things is this was a Gygax trope right here with
Mm-hmm.
factions, potential factions that the
Yep.
PCs could, if they can figure out the dynamics of the factions, they could pit one faction against
Yep.
the other. I'm not sure how useful 78 orcs were against 22 hill giants in one shot, but they
Yeah.
would at least be distractions at the very least. And at the worst case, just a lot of die rolling on the game master's part.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I thought that was fascinating. One of those things that I probably didn't really pick up again, young game master Chris back in the mid '80s probably didn't make that full connection. In the fact that the whole reason the orcs were there and they were rebels were to help the PCs out.
Mm-hmm.
Probably just went over my head, and probably didn't kind of see the genius part of that of the game design there, but
Yeah.
clearly put there to help out. If you sneak past the feast up on the top, get to the lower levels, all of a sudden you could literally have an army
Mm-hmm.
with you. There wasn't enough notes, I don't think, on like why the orcs would exactly like throw their lives away and fight the hill giants, except for the fact that they've been
Yeah.
abused and everything. Like I don't know why they would just trust the PCs and be like, yeah, sure, we'll fight for you. But again, I get it. I get what was
Mhm.
going for there. And so that's my number two, the orcish rebellion in the dungeon.
Cool. And it's a good example, I think, for dungeon masters too at this time who hadn't seen obviously a lot of
Yeah,
published adventures, to see how giants and orcs and ogres are all kind of working together, like
yeah.
what purpose the ogres served in this and what purpose, how the giants treated. I mean, the DM's guide had that little table about how the different races looked at each other, but to actually see this kind of hierarchy playing out in this layer, I thought was interesting. I remember as the DM kind of taking notes from that, back in the day and thinking,
Hmm.
oh wow, like, even though they're both bad guys, like the giants would actually have the orcs as slaves. That totally makes sense. And yet until I read it in this module, I didn't think of something like that. So
Yeah.
I think it's a nice little example for the DM. All right, so we're down to the big number one.
Back
Ba-boom.
down to
I
one.
don't
Yep,
think we're
yep.
gonna have a crossover on this, but we'll see. Um, and this is pure Rick. This is the way I joke about how I know sometimes when I think you like something, this is
Hmm.
this is this
Yeah,
screams Rick on it.
I think I know what this is.
All right, we'll see. Area 17 and 17A, the
Yep.
weird abandoned temple.
Yep.
Oh my
All
God.
you need to do is say weird abandoned temple, and it's like, it's like on Rick's t-shirt. It's
Yeah,
like,
I mean, me who owns how many Lovecraft t-shirts. I mean, yeah, for so many reasons. I mean, it's talk about an Easter egg and just weird. It is weird,
yeah,
mysterious
it's
place,
abandoned too.
abandoned and sealed off. You don't know who sealed it off. Did the orcs seal it off because they don't want it right next to them? Did the giants seal it off after abandoning it? Why was it abandoned? There's a downward sloping passage that's caved in. Was the cave in deliberate by the giants? Did it just happen? Was that passage going to more of a temple? Was it going down to the Duro? Who knows? There's all this mystery surrounding this place. And it's really it's foreshadowing for the elder elemental god that
Hmm.
plays a prominent
Hmm.
role. I mean, we get to see like what is it, in G3, there's a fully
G3.
active temple to the, I mean, a little too active for the elder elemental god. So the fact that that is sort of foreshadowed here, because that ties into obviously the whole overall plot. Now, whether the players pick up on that, probably not. But I mean, it does tie into our whole overall giant and descent plot with the elder elemental god, and the fact that the drill house, what is it, El serves, and I think maybe their allied house Tormund, or Tormor, or whatever it is, worship this elder elemental god, probably in conflict with a lot of other Drow that worship Loth. So it's just cool, foreshadowing. I like this place so much that when I wrote my first Goodman Games product, which was the Scaly God, DCC, I want to say 25. I'm winging it here. I put a little hidden temple in the depths of the caves.
Nice.
I had 3 levels of caves with humanoids, and if you basically fell off a bridge all the way down to an underground stream, you could find this weird little hidden temple, and that place was completely in homage to this weird little temple in here,
Nice.
with this horrible little dangerous area where you could see this amorphous purple thing. So yeah, I love everything about this area. Always have, still do. I found myself smiling like a kid rereading it again just recently
Nice.
for this show. So yeah, a strong number 1 for me. I know it's giant free, but damn it, I like it. 17,
Okay.
17A.
Well, I'm right back to Giants, so I'm gonna save you. That's a great
There
choice.
you
And
go. All right.
I do when I came across that and I saw that, I was like, yeah, I'm like, that'll be on Rick's list. And I'm
Oh
like, I
yeah.
just won't put it on just as a nod to Rick because of that. So my number one does have to do with Giants. It's what we're here to talk about.
Yep.
Area 2, lower level. This is the Hunchback Hill Giant.
Yep.
And this is great. In just a
Yeah.
couple quick sentences, this hill giant's completely nothing like any of the hill giants.
Yeah.
He's hunchback. He's got great strength. He wears chainmail armor, which most of the hill giants don't, so his armor class is better. He wields a +3 battle axe, which
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty badass actually. He's got 2 carnivorous apes as pets,
Yeah.
which is awesome. So really, and again, this encounter is no longer than the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
But in literally a couple sentences, you just get this, you conjure this image of this completely different loner giant with his
Yep.
two crazed apes, and his treasures behind a loose stone in the wall. So it's like you might even miss his loot. I love it. I think, in coming across this and reviewing this one, I wish there was more encounters like this.
Mm-hmm.
I wish some of the other encounters could not just be a couple of dozing giants here and a couple of
Yeah.
good giants standing guard there. And I do even think that maybe even again, and I haven't reread it in a while, but G2 I think might have done a little bit better job with kind of making the encounters a little bit more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought this one was very evocative. This is what, again, we always talk about this when we say module G1. I think of actually 2 things. Well, I think of the Great Hall, but I
Mm-hmm.
think of this encounter. I also think
Mm-hmm.
of the Carrion Crawler encounter,
Yep.
and that was actually the Carrion Crawler room was actually almost one of my. I was
That's funny.
debating on that one being my honorable mention. It's like I thought about that one really hard. That would have been in my next like 5 to 10, the Carrion
Mm-hmm.
Crawler encounter. So,
The
um,
Hunchback almost made my list, and I'm not even
yeah,
kidding. Like those 2, the Hunchback and that Hill Giant Hero, I'm going to call him,
yeah.
because
Damn
those
heels.
2 really stood out.
Yeah.
As like, if we did 10 instead of 5, they would
Yep.
have
Oh yeah.
absolutely in my list.
Yep.
Because I agree. I only wished we had a couple more like that
Yeah,
in
I
here.
agree. I agree. A few
Um,
more would have been really nice to make them really stand out. I get it. It's hard to come up with
yeah.
all different unique ones in every single encounter, but that was definitely my favorite. So that was my number one. So there you have it, folks. So that is our top 5 favorite encounters or facets of G1, the Steeding of the Hill Giant Chief. We have a couple of announcements. Rick, tell them what you got to tell them as usual.
Sure. Well, as always, folks, and we're delighted to be back at you with another season. If you enjoyed what you watched, please give us a like, give us a follow. If you're watching us later on YouTube, subscribe. And as always, keep those comments coming both during the
Yes.
broadcast and later on too on YouTube. We read them all, and we're thrilled that you interact with us, and we get to hear what you think as well. So
Yeah, we love it. So our next show, so we are back on schedule for this year, folks. We are
Hmm.
every third weekend, Sunday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time. We're coming at you with another classic module breakdown. Our next time we will gather in front of you fine folks will be
Yeah.
Sunday, January 29th at 8 p.m. And if you couldn't figure it out by now, our topic will be Adventure G2. The
Yeah.
glacial rift of the frost giant Jarl. We're gonna handle the first three giant modules. Then we're probably gonna take a pause and do one or two other things before
Hmm.
we then jump into the descent,
Yeah.
into the depths adventures. We just want to break it up a little bit.
Yeah. But we'll cover them all, folks. Don't worry.
Yeah,
We'll
we
get
we
through them
we
all.
certainly will. We
Yeah.
have later on this season, we have our 50th episode coming up. We are already trying to figure out what we're going to do special for that. 50 episodes, that's an accomplishment. 1 year before the 50th anniversary of D&D, which is pretty awesome.
Hmm.
And with that, before we leave you, we will do our pearls of wisdom. And Rick,
Mm.
why don't you lead off on that?
Sure. Well, I'm going to take a hint on the basics. One of the standout features of this design to me, which is the brevity of this adventure. And to me, yes, it's a product of its time, but it's also, I think it's a lesson for current DMs as well that, or even adventure writers that, sometimes economy of words is not a bad thing. And certainly for the home DM, I've always said one of the cardinal sins I think is over prepping or overwriting. And honestly, the longer I go, yes, if there's a complicated encounter or trap or something, I will write out a lot of notes. But honestly, for these run of the mill encounters or these, you run into the orcs on the road type of encounters, I just jot down a few sentences now. I think there's a lot to be said for brevity and just,
Mhm.
putting down a few sentences and then letting your imagination, even as the DM, take off at the table and letting that, run where it will at the table, kind of live, if you will. I think there's a lot to be said for that. So yeah, taking a note from this adventure, run with that brevity and see what happens. Don't over prepare. Honestly, have fun with, your game and just, go brief and see where it takes you. That's my pearl of wisdom.
Awesome. My pearl wisdom, very similar, actually. I guess you could say we had a crossover on that. Yeah, I was going to exactly talk about the economy of words as well. And like you said, the brevity of getting, and trust me, I have a lot of trouble with this. I am not good at brevity. So I'll kind of spin it around and say, yeah, I mean, use random encounter tables and random tables to
Yes.
generate
Yeah.
interesting trinkets in pockets
Mhm.
and just yeah, interesting little instead of actual, fight encounters in a dungeon, just interesting sounds or
Mhm.
smells or whatever, little bits and everything. Some of those great tables from the old Dungeon Master's Guide or the dungeon dressings tables and stuff like
Mhm.
that. Don't shy away from using those because
Yes.
again,
Yes.
you can pack a lot of creativity and material in a table. And again, a lot of us, there's a reason why we all collect so many dice. We like
Mhm.
to roll dice. There's not it's sometimes
Yeah.
that's what people come to the table for. They just
Yep.
want to chuck dice. And it's
Yep.
like it doesn't matter if they're chucking dice to swing a sword or
Oh,
make
I
a
have
saving
players
throw.
that will get annoyed if they can't roll a
Oh
die within
yeah.
the first
Yeah.
half hour.
Man, at our
Start.
4-H
They'll
at our
get
4-H
edgy.
last week, we almost had a kid in tears at the end because he didn't get to swing his sword the entire
Ah,
time,
there we
and
go.
he was upset about it. He
Mhm.
was like really upset that he didn't get a chance to roll a die 20. And it's like, so sometimes you have to remember, yes, we're here to just sometimes just chuck dice and have
Yep.
a good time and and
So
and let the
true.
dice fall where they may. The old Knights of the Dinner Table line and everything. So that's where I will leave you guys with tonight. So again, thank you everybody. Thank you to Elena behind the glass doing an awesome
Yes.
job as always. We're excited to be back for our fourth season of Talking TSR. And we're really excited because we've got these little stickers. We've got stickers. So yes, with our logo on it, which is exciting. So anyway, everybody have a great rest of your evening, a great rest of your weekend. Not that there's much of it left, and we will be
Yep.
back in 3 weeks. So everybody, have a good one.
See you then, folks.